Anyway, it's great to be with you all virtually. I apologize for not being with you in person. Huge thanks to the folks at CDFN, my former boss, Karen Ross, and Virginia and Christine and others. Just huge thanks to you all. And then an acknowledgement of not only the leadership at CDFA, but also Cal Davis and the critical role that you all are playing as part of the vanguard on this issue and lots of others associated with climate change. So don't need to tell you all the subject of this conference is incredibly important. Obviously, methane and enteric methane in particular when it comes to agriculture. The critical role that methane plays in U.S. greenhouse gas emissions somewhere around 10%. And you also know that the amount of work that the administration and lots of others are doing and thinking about how we can significantly reduce methane emissions over the coming decade in efforts to address climate change. For agriculture, of course, methane's the enteric methane's the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions behind nitrous oxide, and to date we've had relatively limited options. But as I think you all know better than I, that's changing, and there are substantial opportunities to think about how we change feed, add feed additives, and do other things that can allow us to get a real handle on enteric methane. Before I dive into USDA's approach in areas where we might think about partnering USDA scientists, USDA conservation programs, I thought I would take a step back and just talk broadly about the work USDA is doing on climate and our approach to climate smart agriculture and forestry. I don't need to tell you all, it's really hard to make the numbers work in the United States if we don't both reduce emissions in forestry and maintain the substantial sink in forestry. And then on the ag side, remove or reduce greenhouse gas emissions even while we think about storing more carbon in soils and grasslands. So agriculture is a critical part of the equation. The good news around agriculture and climate is that unlike a lot of environmental issues, there's actually quite a lot of alignment. By that I mean there are a lot of practices which are very good from an agricultural standpoint, an agronomic practice standpoint, from a forestry standpoint, also happen to be good from a climate standpoint. Improve soil productivity by improving soil health, put more carbon in the soil, you can reduce the need for nutrients. You can have more resilient agricultural systems even while you take carbon out of the atmosphere. Turn methane into an energy source or reduce methane that is really just a waste product. Opportunities to maintain herd productivity, create new sources for producers. Even while we address climate change, same thing on the forestry side, reduce the threat of catastrophic wildfire in the West by more thinning, use of prescribed fire. We can create jobs in forest industry even while we reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So there's alignment on climate, which is really interesting from a policy perspective, and often rare for, you think about a lot of environmental issues. We're used to controversy, we're used to trade-offs, and less so here. That doesn't mean that in rural America there isn't skepticism about what climate policy will look like. And we know we see that, concerns about regulations, top-down approaches to climate. It also doesn't mean that there aren't costs. So even while there's alignment, there may be costs or risks that producers have to take on if they're going to implement climate smart activities. That's certainly true if you think about feed additives or other things that could have an impact on productivity. And so producers have to think about that. So even while there's alignment, that doesn't mean that there isn't reason to think about incentives, technical assistance, research, and other things that can be helpful. The approach that you'll see from USDA when it comes to promoting climate smart agriculture and forestry is one that is going to be based on voluntary, incentive-based approaches. We're going to look for opportunities to collaborate with producers on the ground, but also collaborate with universities and state departments of agriculture and lots of other partners in agriculture, agribusiness, and even in folks that produce or demand agricultural commodities. We want to look for ways that we can reward producers through markets, through incentives and other mechanisms, as a way to dramatically scale up the deployment of climate smart agriculture and forestry. An important piece is we have to maintain agricultural productivity as we do this. Yes, of course, we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we also have to figure out how we feed and provide food and fiber for 9+ billion people, approaching 10 billion by 2050. So productivity in and of itself matters. And if we can be more productive on the acres we have, that can reduce pressure on grasslands, forests in the tropics and elsewhere. So productivity matters. And that means if productivity matters, that means we have to think about innovation and new technologies and ways that we can create agricultural systems that work for producers, that allow them to meet their economic objectives, even while we reduce greenhouse gas emissions and provide the products that society needs. And as we look at the kind of policy landscape here, when I started working on these issues in the 1990s, we all assumed we were sort of headed towards cap and trade, offsets, those types of things. And California has proven that offsets are an important part of the mix here, but they're not the only part of the mix. I think the playing field is much more open now. Folks thinking about how can they green supply chains, and could that create economic opportunities for farmers, ranchers, and forest owners? Straight government incentives, tax incentives, and other things. So to me, the playing field is a lot more open than it once was when I started in the beginning of the Obama administration. We really were focused heavily on offsets. Again, offsets are going to be an important part of the equation, but they're not the only thing. And so we have the opportunity here to create solutions that will work for agriculture, that we can produce real greenhouse gas emissions reductions from, and meet the society's needs in agriculture and forestry. Our flagship here at USDA, our flagship program has really been partnerships for climate smart commodities. As we built this and are rolling it out now, we try to do a lot of listening. We wanted this to be something that agriculture and forestry saw themselves in, was something that was responsive to their needs, built for and by folks in agriculture and forestry, really trying to do 4 things with the program. One is to significantly scale up deployment of climate smart practices across both agriculture and forestry, to ensure that all producers get to participate, historically underserved, small, medium-sized, large, that the doors are open to everybody. That we emphasize measurement, monitoring, reporting, verification, and we ensure that we hold ourselves accountable, that we go out and measure and monitor what we're doing. And importantly, that we look for ways that we can create new markets, whether it's offsets markets for climate smart commodities, or other ways that folks can market the climate benefits of agricultural commodities. Importantly, this is not a conservation program. It is a commodity program. We're in the throes right now of rolling it out. We've announced 141 agreements, $3.1 billion. We have about 38 agreements right now that have been executed, another 12 closely following behind them, and more coming every day. We've got some great projects in California, great projects in livestock. California Dairy Research Foundation has a great project. Dairy Farmers of America, a great project on methane. Lots of, as I noted, lots of livestock projects. We have a project with Texas A&M in Kingsville that focused specifically on enteric methane and looking at ways that we can improve cattle genetics as a way to deal with that. In addition to partnerships program, we have a significant opportunities for resources through the Inflation Reduction Act. $19.5 billion in natural resources conservation service conservation programs. You all know that those programs, whether it's the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, Regional Conservation Partnership Program, Conservation Stewardship Program, or our Conservation Easement Programs, we already deploy those across California and lots of other states. This will add significant resources. Many of our efforts are already focused on issues related to livestock, manure management, feed, and other things related to livestock management. But with the new resources, we've got substantial opportunities to engage partners and to look for ways that we can address methane in livestock. And in particular, there are opportunities to think about how do we incentivize as feed additives come onto the market, how do we prepare ourselves to work with farmers, ranchers, livestock operations to put those additives in place? Think about taking some of the risks that might be associated with them. And so one of the things I think we at USDA want to engage all of you and other partners on is making sure we've got the right practices, that the practices kind of allow for the opportunities to deal with enteric methane through feed additives and other approaches, that we ensure we've got enough flexibility in our efforts to do that, and to recognize that we're going to need partners on the ground to help us deploy these programs. Yes, NRCS will be able to hire some new staff, but new staff alone isn't going to be able to do it. We're going to need partners on the ground to help us work with folks in agriculture and forestry to do this. And I think particularly as we think about enteric methane feed additives and other opportunities, we want to look for ways that we can partner with all of you and to think about how do we attach good research, good data gathering as part of that as we roll these incentives out. So lots of opportunities there and lots of desire on our part to engage with folks in this field to make sure we get it right. And recognize as we roll out those incentives that we're going to need to be adaptive and change over time to different situations. And so we've rolled out the first tranche of dollars to the states for the first round of funding. There'll be more to follow, and we'll continue to work on ways that we can improve the practices there to engage on this and other issues. There's significant resources in the IRA as well for monitoring, measurement, and verification. We look forward to working not only amongst different agencies at USDA, but with folks out in the field on doing a better job of measuring methane to understand the impacts of different practices, feed additives, and other things. And so, again, there's an opportunity for us to engage with all of you and to improve the data that we have coming out of USDA. Significant opportunities for research as well. ARS is already devoting significant resources to dealing with manure management, enteric methane, and other issues. NIFA as well, I think, has put out over $45 million in the last 6 years or so related to improvement in livestock greenhouse gas emissions, enteric methane feed supplements as part of that. So again, opportunities to engage with our research institutions at USDA around this as well. Internationally, we've been closely involved in AIM4C, the Agricultural Innovation Mission for climate change, to look at ways that we can partner internationally on a range of issues related to climate change in agriculture. Clearly, enteric methane is part of that, and I think there are opportunities to engage with universities and others here in the USDA as we engage in those international conversations around methane, around nitrous oxide, carbon sequestration, forestry as well. So let me just conclude by, again, emphasizing, I think, the opportunity to look for ways that we can partner with folks outside of USDA around not only our partnerships for climate smart commodities, but also the IRA dollars we have, and the need to work with all of you all to make sure we get the practices right, we get measurement, monitoring, the data right around that as well. Significant opportunities, as I noted, around research and the opportunities to share lessons learned and to leverage resources outside of USDA. I think ultimately we think there's a strong role for incentives here, but we also recognize that government incentives alone aren't going to do this. That we're going to need engagement from markets, from the private sector. Government can help there, but it can't do it alone. And the issue for us is how do we structure our incentives, our investments in a way that bring in that outside interest, and then importantly demonstrate to the public, a sometimes skeptical public, that agriculture can produce real emissions reductions here in a way that is measurable and quantifiable. And lastly, I just say I think our broad interest here is just building a model that works for agriculture, that works for forestry, that demonstrates real environmental benefits, that can have long-term bipartisan support because it's got support in agriculture and forestry in rural parts of the country as well as other parts of the country. And we think if we can build that voluntary incentive-based model, one that we can hold ourselves accountable, that over the long term agriculture and forestry will have a critical role to play in addressing climate change. So let me stop there and happy to take questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Undersecretary Bonnie. Really appreciate it. We do have some questions. I'll take the liberty of kicking off. You mentioned partners on the ground and the importance of them, and you've mentioned some other federal partners. And we're wondering what the strategy is for USDA working with FDA on climate smart ag solutions.
So we've had ongoing conversations with FDA around feed additives, and are confident that there's a path here for
broader use, broader sort of adoption of feed additives, and we'll continue to work on that. Obviously, FDA is its own agency, but we think both with our scientists here, partnering with others outside of USDA, that we can continue to work in a way that we hope we can find a path forward here in the very near future.
Awesome, thank you. And now we'll turn to the audience for questions. And we have mics that we will pass to you.
I have a question.
Please.
You mentioned data gathering. I don't know if you could see me. What type of data would be helpful for USDA? What type of data are you looking for? I think there's a lot of folks in this room who are eager to get data going, data collection going, and so that would be some helpful guidance around that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I'd say sort of two big buckets. One is we have substantial resources that I noted through the Inflation Reduction Act to focus on MMRV. And we're looking at 7 different areas where we're going to make investments. And
Undersecretary, if you could speak a little bit louder, that would help us.
Sorry, let me turn my volume up a little bit too. Is that better? I hope.
Yeah, if you're leaning forward that way, it helps. Thank you.
So I mentioned we have $300 million in the Inflation Reduction Act that is devoted to MMRV for agriculture. We're looking at ways that we can invest broadly across all of agriculture, and we're looking at sort of 7 different areas. One of the important areas is going to be methane and nitrous oxide. And we'll partner across USDA, NRCS, ARS, NIPA, and others to improve our data there. So one set of data is kind of larger scale data to get a good sense of how we do this across the country and how we measure data across the country. And we also have to think of smaller scales. We have to be able to do this at the project level as well. So we'll look at ways that we can do a better job of estimating the impacts of various practices. And so, we're going to have to operate at different scales. And as we invest those dollars, looking at both the national level, looking at the impact of our programs, how we can look at programs, and then looking on the ground at project level data is important. A second area is what I talked about as we develop new practices and as we think about developing practices for feed additives to deal with enteric methane. We're going to need data to be able to demonstrate that those practices work, to basically understand what the how many emissions reductions we get through those investments. So that's another place where I think you all could help us basically understand better the impact of feed additives and to recognize that early on there's going to be some uncertainty. We obviously don't have all the science, but looking for ways that as we spend IRA dollars, we can attach science to it so we can get better information. I think it's going to be really, really useful as well. So we're interested at methane and enteric methane at large scales, at project scales, and at program scales. And I think there are opportunities for you all to plug in and help us do a better job of making sure we can fully understand the impacts of these different practices.